When I heard my own son say the words, "Don't waste money on him. He won't live long anyway." As I lay in a hospital bed recovering from surgery, something inside me shattered. My chest was still stitched from the operation, but those words cut deeper than any scalpel could. And yet, my story doesn't end in that hospital room. Because the very next moment, the door opened, and the doctor stepped in with news that changed everything. Before I tell you how, make sure you subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, and share your thoughts, because what you're about to hear is not just my story. It's a lesson every family needs to hear. I never imagined life would turn out this way. I had spent decades working with my hands, sweating under the summer sun, freezing in winter, taking double shifts to make sure my boy never went hungry. My wife used to say I carried the weight of the world on my back, just to make sure our son Daniel had the chance to live lighter. I remember Christmas mornings when I'd sneak into the living room at 3 a.m., setting up the toy train set he begged for, even though we could barely afford groceries that week. I remember holding his bike steady while he wobbled down the street, shouting, "Don't let go, Dad." And I didn't, not until I was sure he was safe. But children grow, and sometimes love doesn't grow with them. The years passed. His mother passed away. And somewhere along the way, Daniel changed. He became sharper, colder. His words began to sting. He spoke more about money than memories. Still, I told myself, he's my son. Maybe he's just stressed. Maybe life hardened him. That's what I thought, until that day in the hospital. The surgery had been rough. I had complications, the kind that make doctors frown when they think you're not watching. Lying there with tubes in my arms, the beeping of machines keeping me tethered to life. I drifted in and out of consciousness. That's when I heard him, Daniel's voice, low, irritated. "It doesn't make sense to keep spending on him. He won't live long anyway. Why throw good money after bad?" At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard the reply, his wife Lisa whispering, "You're right. Hospitals will drain us dry. Better to just let nature take its course." And in that moment, I realized, to them, I wasn't a father anymore. I was a burden, a problem, an obstacle, standing in the way of their inheritance. But before I could let despair swallow me whole, the door creaked open. The doctor walked in, holding a folder. His expression was unreadable. He glanced at Daniel, then at me, and said words that froze my son's smug smile in place. And that is where everything began to change. The doctor stepped into the room, his white coat crisp, his eyes sharp with authority. He looked first at me, then at Daniel and Lisa, who were still standing at my bedside as if they owned the place. "I have news," he said, his voice steady, "and it's important." Daniel straightened, putting on that fake mask of concern he always used when strangers were around. "Doctor, how much longer do you think my father has?" "We need to prepare." Prepare. The word made my stomach turn. But the doctor didn't answer Daniel. Instead, he turned to me, locking eyes with the kind of firmness that only truth can carry. "Mr. Hayes, your surgery was a success. Not only did we remove the complication, we found something else, something we didn't expect." Lisa frowned. "Something else?" The doctor nodded. "Yes, the initial scans had worried us. But when we went in, we discovered the mass was benign. Not only benign, it was removable without consequence. Mr. Hayes, you are not dying. In fact, with proper care, you have many healthy years ahead of you." The room fell silent. I stared at him, the words hitting me like sunlight breaking through a storm. Years. I had years left. Life wasn't slipping away as Daniel had hoped. It was stretching forward, offering me a second chance. But what caught me even more was the look on my son's face. For a moment, Daniel's carefully constructed mask cracked. His mouth fell open. His eyes darted nervously, and his hands clenched into fists. That single sentence from the doctor had destroyed the plan he and Lisa thought they had sealed. Lisa recovered first. "Oh, that's wonderful news," she said, her voice as thin as paper. She even tried to force a smile, but her eyes betrayed her. They looked terrified. The doctor gave me a reassuring nod, placed a copy of my results on the bedside table, and added, "With rehabilitation, Mr. Hayes, you could be back on your feet in weeks. I'll arrange for a nutritionist and physical therapist to meet with you." When he left, the room changed. Daniel didn't look at me. He stared at the floor, his jaw tight. Lisa shifted uncomfortably, fiddling with her expensive bracelet. Neither spoke for what felt like minutes. Finally, I said softly, "You thought I was finished, didn't you?" Daniel's head snapped up. "Dad, don't start. You don't know what it's like. Dealing with hospital bills, managing things. We were just being realistic." "Realistic," I whispered, my voice shaking but not from weakness. "You stood over your father's bed and said I wasn't worth keeping alive. That's not realism, Daniel. That's cruelty." For the first time in years, I saw fear in my son's eyes. Not fear of losing me, fear of what my survival meant for him. And right then, lying in that hospital bed, I made a silent promise. I would not waste this second chance. I would not let betrayal go unanswered, because they had shown me their true faces, and I was going to show them mine. The hours after the doctor left were heavy with unspoken words. Daniel pretended to check messages on his phone. Lisa stared at the wall, and I lay still, letting silence do the talking. But inside me, something had shifted. For years I had ignored the little signs, Daniel's dismissive tone, Lisa's sharp remarks about money, the way they only called when they needed something. I thought if I stayed patient, if I gave them time, they'd remember who I was. The father who raised him, the man who never let him go hungry. But that day, that single overheard sentence, tore the veil away. I was no longer blind. That night, while Daniel and Lisa went home, probably to argue about what my survival meant for their plans, I asked the nurse for my wallet. She hesitated, but I told her I needed to make some calls. And that's how my quiet plan began. I started with a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, the same one who helped me write my will after my wife passed away. I had been generous in those papers. Too generous. Daniel was set to inherit everything. Our house, my savings, even the little cabin by the lake where his mother and I spent our summers. But generosity has limits, especially when it is met with betrayal. I called the lawyer and told him to come to the hospital. We would rewrite everything, not out of spite, but out of justice. If my son believed I wasn't worth keeping alive, then perhaps he wasn't worth being rewarded with everything I had built. Days passed. My recovery was slow but steady. Each day the doctor's words echoed in my mind. "You have years left." Daniel visited once, but it wasn't out of love. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and asked questions like, "So, how long before you can handle your finances again? And maybe you should consider signing power of attorney papers, just in case." I smiled, nodded, played the part of the weakened old man, because I had learned something powerful in those hospital days. Sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. I listened, I observed, and I planned. Meanwhile, Lisa wasn't subtle. She sat by my bed one afternoon, her perfume heavy in the air, and said, "You know, Mr. Hayes, it would really put Daniel's mind at ease if you wrote down exactly where all your accounts are. That way when the time comes, it won't be stressful for him." Her voice dripped with fake sweetness, but her eyes gave her away. They gleamed with hunger, and I thought to myself, if they are so eager to see me gone, then maybe it's time I give them exactly what they deserve, just not in the way they expect. I turned my face toward the window, the evening sun painting the walls gold. My body was still weak, but my mind? My mind had never been sharper, because what Daniel and Lisa didn't know was this. By the time I walked out of that hospital, everything, my estate, my savings, my legacy, would be set in motion for a reckoning they could never escape. When I was discharged from the hospital, Daniel insisted on driving me home. At first it looked like concern, his hand steadying me as I climbed into the car, his voice soft. "Take it easy, Dad." But I knew better. Because the moment the nurse handed me the discharge papers, his eyes darted to the envelope, hungry to see what was written there. He wasn't interested in my health. He was interested in what control he could wrestle from me. The drive was quiet until Daniel finally said, "Dad, you should really think about simplifying things. I mean, you don't need all those properties. Maintaining them will just stress you out. Maybe you should sign them over. Let me take care of them for you." I didn't answer. I kept my gaze fixed on the road ahead, the autumn leaves blowing across the windshield. I let him think I was too weak to argue, because silence made him bold. Lisa called that evening. Her voice dripped with false warmth. "Oh, Mr. Hayes, I made you some soup. I'll bring it over tomorrow." And you know Daniel was talking about how complicated bank accounts can be when things happen. "Maybe you should show us where you keep everything, just so there are no surprises." Soup and bank accounts. That was their version of care. But cracks began to show. One night, I overheard them whispering in the kitchen while they thought I was asleep in the living room. "Lisa, what if he lasts another 10 years? We can't wait that long. Daniel, we won't. I'll convince him to sign early. He trusts me more than you think." "Lisa, and if he doesn't?" Daniel's silence was answer enough. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, every word searing into my mind. They weren't just greedy, they were desperate, and desperation makes people reckless. The next morning, I made my first move. I called my lawyer again, this time from my bedroom phone, so Daniel wouldn't hear. "It's time," I told him. "Rewrite everything. Nothing goes to Daniel or Lisa. Instead, set up a trust. Half to charity, half to someone who truly deserves it." "Who?" the lawyer asked. I smiled, picturing her face gentle, kind. The nurse who had held my hand when the pain was unbearable. To someone who actually cared whether I lived or died. He didn't question me. He knew I was serious. By the end of that week, every document that mattered was sealed and signed. Daniel and Lisa thought they were tightening their grip. They had no idea I had already cut the rope. But fate wasn't finished. Because just when I thought I had seen the worst of their greed, Daniel showed his hand fully, on a night that still makes my blood run cold. That was the night he confronted me. No longer pretending to be the caring son, but showing me exactly how far he was willing to go. And that was when my plan for justice sharpened into something far more dangerous. It was late past midnight when I woke to the sound of heavy footsteps outside my bedroom door. My body was still tender from surgery, but instinct told me to stay quiet. The door creaked open. Daniel stepped inside, the hall light casting his shadow long against the wall. His face was tense, jaw locked, eyes restless. He thought I was asleep, but when he turned and saw my eyes open, he froze. "Dad," he whispered, too calm, too rehearsed. "We need to talk." I pushed myself up slowly, ignoring the sting in my stitches. "What is it, Daniel?" He shut the door behind him, leaning against it like a prison guard keeping his captive from escaping. "You've got to stop being stubborn. You're not going to be around forever. And Mom left us with nothing but bills. If you want to do one decent thing before you go, make sure Lisa and I are secure." I stared at him. "Secure? You've had every opportunity. I gave you my life, my work, my savings. What more do you want?" His voice hardened. "Everything. The house, the cabin, the accounts, all of it. Just sign the papers." Lisa already had them drawn up. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "You already had papers made." He nodded, stepping closer. "It's not betrayal, Dad. It's reality. You're too weak to manage anything. You could die tomorrow. Why make things complicated?" For the first time, I saw him not as my son, but as a stranger, a cold, desperate stranger. I let my silence stretch, my eyes locked on his. Finally, I whispered, "And if I don't?" His lips pressed into a thin line. "Then you'll regret it. I won't keep wasting my life waiting for you to decide. This is happening with or without your blessing." And then he did something that shattered whatever faint hope I had left. He pulled out the folder from his bag and tossed it onto my bed. Inside were papers granting him full control of everything I owned. "Sign it tomorrow," he ordered, his voice sharp as broken glass, "or I'll find another way." Then he left the room, slamming the door behind him. I sat there in the dark, staring at those papers. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the storm brewing inside me. Because in that moment, Daniel didn't just ask for my inheritance. He buried the last shred of the bond between father and son. And he didn't realize it yet. But by handing me that folder, he gave me the very weapon I needed to end his schemes once and for all. The folder lay on my lap long after Daniel stormed out. The bold black letters on the cover, "Power of Attorney," stared back at me like a dare. He thought he had me cornered. Weak, frail, half alive. He didn't know the strength that comes when a man has nothing left to lose but his dignity. At dawn, I called my lawyer again. Bring a notary, I told him. We're going to sign something today. But not what Daniel expects. When Daniel arrived that evening, Lisa trailing behind him with her saccharine smile, I was already sitting at the dining table. The folder was neatly stacked in front of me. Did you sign? He asked immediately, his eyes gleaming. I did, I replied calmly, sliding the papers toward him. He tore them open, his hands trembling with greed. He scanned the first page, then the second, his brow furrowed. What is this? Lisa leaned over his shoulder, her face paling as she read. Because what they saw wasn't their victory. It was my trap. The documents gave me power of attorney over my own estate, but with one devastating twist. The clause removed Daniel and Lisa entirely from any inheritance, transferring everything into a trust that bypassed them completely. What is this, Dad? Daniel's voice cracked, anger flooding his face. This isn't what we agreed. We didn't agree to anything, I said quietly. You shoved papers in my face, like a vulture circling a dying man. But I'm not dead, and I won't let you bleed me dry. Lisa slammed her hand on the table. You can't do this. Daniel is your son. I met her glare. A son who stood over my hospital bed and said I wasn't worth keeping alive. A son who threatened me in my own house. That's not a son. That's a thief, wearing my blood. Daniel's face turned red, veins bulging in his neck. You'll regret this, old man. I leaned forward, my voice steady, each word like a hammer striking steel. No, Daniel, you will. That night, they stormed out. But I knew it wasn't over. Greed like theirs doesn't surrender easily. They would try again through manipulation, through lies, maybe even through force. But now, I was ready, because I wasn't just protecting what I had. I was building something far more powerful, a plan that would expose them for exactly who they were. And when the moment came, the entire world would see Daniel, not as a son, but as the man who tried to bury his father before he was dead. The next week was quiet. Too quiet. Daniel stopped calling. Lisa didn't drop by with her fake smiles or lukewarm soup. For a moment, I almost wondered if they had given up. But no, greed doesn't disappear. It festers. I didn't have to wait long to see it. It was Sunday afternoon when the knock came. I opened the door to find Daniel standing there, his jaw tight, Lisa clinging to his arm like a shadow. They didn't even bother with pleasantries. Dad, we need to talk, Daniel said. His tone wasn't a request. I let them in, watching as they made themselves at home in my living room. Lisa crossed her legs on the sofa, her diamond bracelet catching the sunlight, while Daniel paced like a caged animal. Finally, he blurted it out. You're making a mistake, cutting us out of everything, after all we've done for you? I raised an eyebrow. All you've done? You mean threatening me, treating me like a walking bank account, wishing me dead in a hospital bed? His face flushed. That's not what I meant. You misunderstood. But Lisa cut in, sharper than him. Look, Mr. Hayes, be reasonable. If you leave everything to charity or strangers, people will talk. They'll think you lost your mind. They'll fight it in court, and trust me, we'll win. The venom in her voice didn't surprise me anymore. But what did surprise me was how far they were willing to push. Daniel leaned in close, lowering his voice. Sign the papers, Dad. Don't make this ugly. We'll take care of things. You can live comfortably. We'll visit more. You won't be alone. I almost laughed. Visit more. I had been invisible to them until they smelled money. I met his eyes and said quietly, if you wanted to keep me alive in your will, you should have treated me like I was alive while I was here. His nostrils flared. Lisa's nails tapped against the glass coffee table. And in that moment, I knew they weren't going to stop with words. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote everything down. Every threat, every cruel word, every whisper I'd overheard. I made copies of the hospital report, the will, the trust documents. I sealed them in an envelope with a simple note. If anything happens to me, give this to the police. I handed it to my lawyer the next morning. He looked at me grimly. You think they'd go that far? I stared out the window, the autumn wind rattling the branches bare. Greed is a fire. Once it starts burning, it doesn't stop. And Daniel, he's already fanning the flames. 2 nights later, my fears were confirmed, because I woke to the sound of breaking glass. Someone was inside my house, and I already knew who it was. The sound of glass shattering jolted me awake. For a moment, I thought it was part of a dream, until the unmistakable crunch of footsteps across broken shards sent adrenaline racing through my veins. I didn't panic. Instead, I reached for the small lamp by my bed, staying quiet, listening. Whispered voices floated down the hallway. One male, one female, Daniel and Lisa. "Check his desk," Lisa hissed. "He must have the documents here." My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the cold realization that they hadn't even waited a month before turning my home into a hunting ground. I slipped out of bed, my joints aching, but my resolve steady. The floorboards creaked under my weight, but the storm outside masked the sound. I moved carefully toward the hallway, the lamplight casting long shadows across the walls. And there they were. Daniel crouched at my desk, rifling through drawers, papers scattering like fallen leaves. Lisa stood behind him, her eyes darting nervously toward the door, clutching her phone like a weapon. "Where is it?" Daniel growled. "He's hiding it somewhere. I know he changed the will." Lisa's lips curled. "Then find it." Before she could finish, I flipped the hallway light on. They froze. For a moment, the only sound was the storm outside rattling the windows. Daniel's hand stilled over my papers. Lisa's face went pale. "What are you doing in my house at 2 a.m? My voice was calm, almost too calm. Daniel's jaw worked. "Dad, listen. We thought something happened to you. We were worried." I stepped forward, my eyes never leaving his. "Worried? You don't break into someone's house when you're worried. You do it when you're desperate." Lisa tried to smile, her voice trembling. "We just wanted to help you organize. You're not well. You shouldn't be managing things alone." "Enough." My voice cut through hers like a blade. "You showed me who you are the moment you stood in my hospital room and wished me dead." Daniel's face twisted with anger. "So that's it? You'd rather give everything to strangers than your own son?" I stepped closer, inches from him now. "No, Daniel. I'd rather give everything to people who actually value life, who actually value me." For a moment, I thought he might strike me. His hands clenched, his breath sharp. But then, red and blue lights flashed through the curtains. Lisa gasped. The neighbors. The sirens grew louder. Tires screeched on the wet pavement. Daniel's eyes went wide. You called them?" I allowed myself the smallest of smiles. "No, I didn't need to." "The lawyer you were so eager to steal from?" "He knew this might happen. He set a watch on my house. He called the police the moment you broke in." The front door burst open. Flashlights cut through the dark. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I wasn't the weak one. Daniel was. Because as the officers shouted commands forcing him to drop everything, he realized something he had never considered before. His father wasn't the helpless old man he thought. I was his reckoning. The police flooded my living room, boots heavy against the wooden floor, flashlights cutting through the storm's darkness. Daniel stood frozen, his hands raised halfway, torn between defiance and fear. Lisa shrank back against the wall, clutching her designer purse as though it could shield her from the truth. "Sir, step away from the desk," one officer ordered. Daniel turned to me, his face red with fury. "Dad, tell them. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them we're family." "Family." The word sounded poisonous coming from his mouth. I stood straighter, my voice calm but ironclad. "They broke into my house in the middle of the night. They came here looking for documents that don't belong to them. That's not family. That's theft." The officers didn't hesitate. One of them pulled Daniel's hands behind his back, the click of the handcuffs echoing through the room. Lisa's eyes widened as another officer stepped toward her. "Wait," she cried. "I didn't do anything. I was just—" "You were trespassing," the officer cut in, "and aiding an attempted burglary." Lisa's voice broke into a frantic pitch. No, this isn't happening. He's lying. He's manipulating you." But her words were drowned out by the storm, by the reality of the flashing lights outside, and by the truth she couldn't bury anymore. Daniel struggled, his face twisted in rage. "You think this changes anything? You think you can just cut me out like I'm nothing? You're still going to die, old man. And when you do—" The officer shoved him forward before he could finish. "That's enough." I watched as they dragged him out into the night. Lisa stumbling behind, her mascara running as the rain soaked her face. And for the first time in years, the house was quiet, peaceful. But even as the silence settled, I knew this wasn't the end. The law could punish them for breaking in, for attempted theft. But there was something deeper at stake, something beyond handcuffs and police reports. This wasn't just about my son trying to steal my money. It was about the rot that had poisoned his heart. And if I wanted true justice, if I wanted to make sure Daniel never saw me as weak again, I needed to take one more step. Not revenge, something far sharper, something permanent. Because the next time Daniel and Lisa stood in front of me, it would not be in my home. It would be in a courtroom. And there, with everyone watching, I would reveal the truth. 2 months later, the courthouse smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. The kind of place where truth and lies wrestle in front of strangers who have the power to decide your fate. Daniel sat at the defendant's table, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the dark circles under his eyes. Lisa sat beside him, her face powdered and painted, but the cracks showed, her eyes darted, her lips trembling every time the judge entered the room. Across the aisle, I sat with my lawyer. My body was stronger now, the weeks of physical therapy restoring what surgery had tried to take. But more than strength, I had resolve. I wasn't here as a victim. I was here as a man reclaiming his dignity. The charges: attempted burglary, trespassing, elder intimidation. Daniel and Lisa thought it was a game of words, but I had something stronger: evidence. When the judge called my name, I rose slowly, steadying myself on the wooden bench, and walked to the stand. The courtroom quieted. Every eye turned toward me. "Mr. Hayes," the lawyer prompted, "can you tell the court what happened on the night in question?" I looked straight at Daniel. His eyes met mine, defiant, but I saw the flicker of unease. "They broke into my house," I said calmly. "Not out of concern, not out of love, but out of greed. They wanted my will, my estate, everything I worked for. And when they thought I was too weak to resist, they tried to take it." Gasps rippled through the audience. I reached into the folder my lawyer had prepared and held up the envelope I'd given him weeks earlier, the one filled with every detail of their betrayal. "Here," I continued, "are transcripts of what I overheard in the hospital. My son saying, 'Don't waste money on him, he won't live long anyway.' My daughter-in-law urging him to push me into signing everything away. And here," I held up the second document, "are the papers they forced into my hands, papers giving them complete control over my life." The courtroom buzzed, reporters scribbling, spectators whispering. Daniel shot to his feet. "He's twisting everything. He's senile. He doesn't know what he's talking about." But the judge banged his gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Hayes, Jr. You'll have your turn." Lisa's mask cracked. She leaned into Daniel, whispering furiously. But I caught it. Everyone caught it. Desperation, fear. My lawyer stepped forward. "Your Honor, not only do we have the testimony of Mr. Hayes, we also have corroborating witness statements. The nurse who overheard their conversations, the police who responded to the break-in, the neighbors who saw them enter through the window. The evidence is overwhelming." The judge turned to Daniel, his voice stern. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Daniel's jaw clenched, his voice shook. "He's lying. He's doing this to punish me." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Punishment isn't handed out by fathers, Mr. Hayes. It's handed out by the law." And with that, the gavel came down. Guilty. As Daniel and Lisa were let out, their faces pale with humiliation, I sat back in my chair, my heart steady. It wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about finally seeing justice, not from a courtroom, but from life itself. The courtroom emptied slowly, the buzz of whispers following Daniel and Lisa as they were led away in handcuffs. Reporters swarmed the hall, their cameras flashing like lightning, but I didn't stay to watch. I had already seen what I needed to see, the truth finally stripped bare for all the world to witness. I walked out of the courthouse into the crisp winter air, my cane steady beneath me, my lungs filling deeper than they had in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not from sickness, not from weakness, but from the crushing weight of betrayal that had shadowed me for too long. Life after that didn't become perfect. It never does. But it became honest. I poured my energy into the trust I had created, making sure my wife's memory lived on through scholarships, donations, and community programs. Money that could have been wasted on greed now flowed towards something pure. And to my surprise, something else bloomed from the ashes of that trial. The nurse who had held my hand during those long hospital nights. Her name was Teresa. She visited often, not because she wanted anything, but because she cared. She brought meals, laughter, stories. One afternoon she asked why I had left half my estate to her in the trust. I told her the truth. Because you valued my life when my own son didn't. You reminded me I was still worth something. Tears filled her eyes, but she only nodded, placing her hand gently over mine. As for Daniel and Lisa, prison has a way of teaching lessons. Letters came, at first filled with anger, later with apologies. I read them, but I didn't reply. Forgiveness is a gift, and I wasn't ready to give it. Not yet. Maybe one day. Maybe never. But I did forgive myself, for the years I spent excusing their cruelty, for pretending not to see what they had become, for carrying a love that was never returned. And in that forgiveness, I found peace. On my porch now, I sit watching the sun set over the trees, Kane resting against my chair, a cup of warm coffee in hand. My body is older, but my spirit feels lighter, stronger, because when my son wished me dead, life gave me a second chance instead, and I learned the hardest, most liberating truth of all. Family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by love, by loyalty, by those who stand beside you when the storm comes. And sometimes, it's only in the storm that you finally see who's worth keeping. If you've listened this far, remember, never let betrayal blind you to your worth. Choose love, choose loyalty, and guard your dignity fiercely. Make sure to subscribe, share this story, and leave a comment about what you would do if you were in my shoes. Because in the end, we all have a choice, to let betrayal define us or to rise above it.